people like me who are absolutely terrified of the ocean is because it kind of embodies a lot of the things that make me afraid of it in the first place. It is absolutely unexplainable, and your imagination is pretty much the deciding factor in whatever could have happened to these people. Because just like with the ocean itself, if we're taking a scenario that is so beyond our minds of anything that we can know or understand, then our deepest fears might as well be the truth. And if you're thinking, well, that was in the 1800s and people just used to die back then, which, to be fair, people did just up and die for no reason back then, then allow me to turn your attention to the Cause 2. I'm going to call it Cause, whatever. Now, the Cause 2 was admittedly shorter than the Mary Celeste, boasting a 32-foot span. However, it was still a yacht-class vessel and definitely capable of sailing in the ocean. On April 15th in 2007, a three-man crew decided to go out on a recreational expedition aboard the Cause 2. They set out from Queensland, Australia, and from everything that I've read of the family members of the people who were on the boat, it seems that they were just going to spend a few days going from different docks and sailing about at sea. That was until on April 18th, a helicopter spotted the boat and noticed that there didn't seem to be anyone on it. After some reports and investigations, eventually on April 20th, the boat was found and boarded about 88 miles off the coast of Australia. And similar to the Mary Celeste, whenever they got onto the boat, the entire crew was missing. Now, notably, the situation aboard the Cause 2 was noticeably more unnerving. There was food laid out on plates along with silverware, implying that everyone was just about to sit down to eat. The laptop was open and still on, implying that someone had just been using it. Even the engine was running. Everything pointed towards the idea of everyone simply just hiding as if the boat was being used only moments ago. Furthermore, all the life jackets were still hung up and none of them being used. The GPS was still working along with all distress functions that the boat had, although none of them had been activated. Even more so, on the front of the boat, the small life raft as well as the anchor were still tied up and not being used, meaning that it seemed no one tried to stop the boat or make an escape. The one thing that was amiss on the boat is that one of the sails were very badly shredded, as if something had cut through them and torn them until they were useless. The police were able to use the GPS that was on the boat in order to backtrack the path that the Cause 2 took. And then on the GPS path, you can see the boat go out from port on the first day of their journey, slow down all at once, and then just start drifting until it was eventually found. As if the boat was just sailing out, and then for some reason, the engine went into neutral, and those three guys just disappeared off the face of the earth. Besides from the sail, the only one thing that, doesn't really count as a miss was the fact that the lure from the fishing pole was hooked into one of the side ropes off the side of the ship, which also paints another picture of what was happening when this all went down. They were out fishing, there was a pair of sunglasses found sitting on one of the front chairs on the boat, and there was a coffee mug on the back deck just sitting on a table. Again, the whole picture implies that everyone was about to eat, they were out fishing, they were bathing in the sun, and then just disappeared. Now, unlike the Mary Celeste, this is a modern investigation, so there had to be a modern proceeding of how this all went out, because three people can't just disappear and then the government not do anything about it. So at the final investigation, where they went into the whole story of what probably happened, the coroner's report, which it sounds weird for a coroner to give a report with no bodies, but I digress. In the coroner's report for what he proposes might have happened, it sounds like a slapstick comedy. Like, his story was that one of the guys got his hook stuck on that rope on the side that I mentioned earlier, and when he bends down to pick it up, he just falls in the water, to which the second guy says, "Don't worry, buddy, I'll come get you," and he jumps off the boat, but he forgot to turn the engine off, so the third guy puts the engine in neutral, and then he undoes the sail, but the sail swings all the way around the boat and smacks him and throws him off the side. So his idea was, in the span of 30 seconds, all three of them were so incompetent that they managed to Three Stooge their way into the ocean. But as far as official reports go, that's all that we got. But despite that, as well as large-scale searches along the coast of Australia, no evidence of them was ever found. And what's so shocking about this in particular is you imagine that someone who's taken every precaution between the GPS and the radio equipment and all of that would not have the capability to go missing in the modern world. However, that's exactly what happened. And this is a much more recent occurrence, and the families of those who were lost are still alive, so I am not going to make a joke that it was a kraken, so I'm just going to move on. And you may be listening to all this and thinking, well, that sounds pretty creepy. I guess I'll just stay on land where I'm safe. But see, that's how the ocean gets you. And to prove that there is no safety from the most disturbing thing on the entire planet, look no further than the Flannan Isles lighthouse mystery. Off the west coast of Scotland, there is a series of small islands known as the Flannan Isles, with one of the largest being that of the Elanemore Island. In 1899, a very large lighthouse was built on Elanemore Island as a way of signaling sailors who were coming into port. Our mystery begins on December 7th, after the new relief comes in order to stock the island with its new set of wikis. I love that word. See, there were 4 workers who worked at the Elanemore Lighthouse year-round, and they worked in 2-week shifts. In other words, there's always 3 people on the island, and every 6 weeks someone gets to take a break, and it rotates like that. So on December 7th, they make their trade. The relief comes to stay on the lighthouse as the guy who's taking a break is able to go back to shore. So the 3 men within the lighthouse should not come into contact with anyone else for 2 weeks. However, something weird was noted on December 15th whenever a boat that was coming into shore did not see the light from a lighthouse, which is, again, a bad thing. See, lighthouses have to be on all the time when it's night, because even if it's a perfectly clear night, a ship coming in may not see the island and may hit it, which, again, bad thing. So for the lighthouse to not be shining, either those guys are really slacking off or something's wrong. On December 20th, which would have been the normal relief time anyway, a crew tried to go out to the island. However, there was an uncharacteristically thick fog at the time, and they weren't able to go until the 26th. As a matter of fact, on December 7th, whenever those 3 were placed on the island in the first place, there was a mention of a fog beginning to settle in the area. And again, at the 20th, it was so bad that they couldn't even make their way to the island. Whenever the relief boat finally got to the island, they came to the east dock and for one saw that there were several boxes and supplies sitting on the dock that hadn't been brought up to the lighthouse yet. Furthermore, there was no one to greet them and no signal that a ship was coming in. See, lighthouses are always supposed to be on the watch, and there's always someone looking for ships to come off the coast. So if a ship's coming towards you, you're supposed to raise a specific kind of flag in order to indicate it, although that hadn't happened. The relief vessel, thinking this is weird, shoots a flare into the air and sounds the whistle, but no one comes out to greet them. So they decide to send a small search party to shore to see what they can run into, and this is the sight that they find. The fenced-in gate to the front of the lighthouse entrance was closed, as well as the front door of the lighthouse itself. Furthermore, inside the lighthouse itself, every other door was also closed. All of the beds were unmade, and food had been set out as if someone, again, was in the middle of eating and just going about their day. Now, there's also a mention here that all of the clocks were stopped, and while I really wish that was a super creepy thing, as if there's some weird time glitch happening here, the way clocks worked back then is you had to wind them up, so that just means no one wound them up in a while. I know, we were really close to like time ghost stories, but don't worry, I'll try to make it fun. And among the belongings of the 3 men who were staying at the lighthouse, one of their coats was still present. See, this is on the ocean in northern Scotland in December. There was no way anyone was stepping outside, much less doing work outside, without wearing their coat. So the fact that one of the coats was still hung up next to the door implies that someone didn't have intention to go outside when whatever this was happened. So the entire relief party does a huge search and comb over of the island. Now, if you remember earlier, I said they arrived at the east dock. Whenever they went to the west dock, they did find some weird stuff. The west dock seemed to have been completely destroyed, with iron bars ripped out of the ground and cracks in the dock itself and wood thrown everywhere, and some reports even saying a giant several 100-pound boulder had been rolled across the dock. Now, while searching everything within the first wiki's logbook of the island, I still love that word, he had mentioned that the west dock did need repairs and there were several broken things. However, from my reading, he didn't say anything to the effect of like the entire dock is destroyed. It was kind of just general repair stuff. So for whatever reason, it seems that the west dock had gotten worse. Keep in mind the contrast between that and the east dock that the crew arrived on, where there were just boxes sitting around everywhere. Within this log that I mentioned a moment ago, there was a day-by-day account of everything that had happened on the island itself. These were general readings of barometric pressure and how many ships were spotted. However, it noted the intense fog that I mentioned earlier, as well as very turbulent weather. Now here's the thing, right? This island, while yes, off from shore, it isn't like horribly off from shore. As a matter of fact, there was a guy I'm going to mention in a second whose job was to live on his home near the coast and report that he could see the light from the lighthouse every night. So it's close enough to shore that you can make visual contact with it. However, there were no storms reported within this time period. And again, it's right next to shore, so if there were these massive storms that were mentioned in the logbook, someone should have known about it. Remember that guy I said who his entire job was to make sure that he could see the light every night? Well, when he was questioned about it, he said that the fog was so thick that you could only see it on the night of the 12th, and every other night he couldn't even make out the island or the light or anything. And my favorite part about this entire story is the second wiki's log of what had happened. And I know that historically there's been some people who have said there's no way to validate if this is real or not, and I'll be honest, I don't care. This is my favorite part of the story. In the assistant wiki's log, which complemented the main wiki's log that I mentioned earlier, the assistant spoke of how the storms were getting worse and worse by the night. As the official log was saying that the storms were getting worse, the assistant began to say things like the storm is so bad it's causing all of the men to begin to pray, along with saying that now the men are beginning to cry and they don't know what they're going to do. The last entry of the original logbook was on December the 15th, specifically on 9 a.m. of December 15th, which if you'll remember, the night of December 15th is when the boat that was passing by said the light wasn't on. And also, if the storms were this dramatic, I imagine the boats passing by the island would also have mentioned them. So we can assume that whatever happened to this crew happened within 9 a.m. on December 15th to whenever that ship passed on the same day as well. To which the only entry for December 15th in the second hands log is storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. And there was never another entry, and the crew of the Elaine Moore Lighthouse were never seen again. Alright, so now that I've got all the pieces there, I can put my evil puzzle together. I also want to mention I'm not the only one to make it a weird thing. There are stories within the Flandin Isles that there's these 3 crows that stalk the island, and that those crows are the spirits of these 3 men, or in some cases quite literally the men got turned into birds for some reason. The area of the Flandin Isles is notorious for its legends of sea monsters. Several stories of mermaids and sirens that lure men to their death, as well as creatures known as sprites, which I am not kidding, will hop onto your boat and then drown you if you do not beat them in a rhyming duel. So these are underwater mermaid things that rap battle you or else they kill you. I don't even have to add anything to that. That speaks for itself. I'm moving on. The story that I love to go with, and the one that terrifies me so much, is perhaps the men were being judged or some form of supernatural occurrence was happening within that fog that settled over the island. Think about it, a fog so thick that no one on the island could see them on shore, and within that fog themselves they reported there being severe thunderstorms that got to the point that they were praying and crying and everything else before he said God is over all, and they all disappeared off the face of the earth. Now, do I believe in that? Probably not, but I really want to. And similar to my Mary Celeste thing, what are you gonna do? Tell me no? That's no fun. See, it's stories like that that capture the mystique of the ocean, or the idea that no matter how much we discover about it, there's still so many ridiculously unanswered questions that there's never going to be a way for us to bottle it up and then figure out every piece of it. Because just like with the Elaine Moore Lighthouse, how do you naturally explain that? Other than the fact that a giant mist came and settled in, put the men through the trials of God and turbulent storms before they went to the West Dock and the Kraken destroyed it as it dragged the men into the sea. I really don't see what the hang up with you believing it is. And what's so interesting to me about this is these ideas of ghost ships and ocean creatures are by no means anything new. Think of stories like the Flying Dutchman, old legends of ghost ships that would pass you, and then on deck there would be the souls of sailors who have died who asked you to give a message to their loved ones back at home. Isn't that just horrific in like the best way, or the fact that every old world nation had pictures of giant sea serpents drawn off the map, with the idea that if you go too far off the map, there will be monsters. Or the idea that every religion, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, all of it, have some legend of a giant leviathan that lurks beneath the waters. Or legends like the Kraken. Don't we think it's weird that for literally hundreds of years, every single civilization had stories of this giant octopus thing that would attack ships and then kill sailors and wreck the ship? And we were all collectively like, haha, weren't those guys idiots? And then, you know, like 30 years ago, we found colossal squids that are like the size of 4 school buses. And we're like, oh, look, they are real. But aren't those stories stupid and fake? Haha, they definitely didn't kill people. In some cases, with things like that, we understand the colossal squid to exist, and we understand them to be ferocious predators. It's almost comforting to think that situations like the Mary Celeste could be caused by something so explainable. It's as if we would be fortunate to wrap our heads around these paranormal instances that occur. And I could go into a whole rant now about the Bermuda Triangle, but I'll be honest, that's like surface level stuff, like, compasses work funny here. Like, we're down here. We're way past that. And way past that, we can get into the modern stories of sea monsters being found. Like, for example, in 1848, there was a British naval ship known as the Daedalus. The entire crew of the Daedalus attested the same story of seeing a 100-foot-long massive sea serpent off of the side of their ship. They said it slithered along the side of the ship before diving underwater. There are several drawings and depictions put together of what this creature looked like. And if you think for some reason the entire crew was just high and had no idea what they're talking about, the United States brig known as the Daphne also saw the exact same thing, and they didn't only see it within the same month, they fired their guns at it and chased it down, saying that it was a giant ocean monster. So you have 2 different militaries, both full of very experienced crewmen, who one of them shot at it and then tried to run it down, and historians have said that it was probably a whale. I hate that. That makes me more upset than anything. Whenever there's a story like this, people can't just be like, oh, I guess we'll never know. They give it the stupidest explanation. Like, yeah, 400 experienced crewmen who have, seen every kind of whale imaginable, they were probably just dumber than I am. More recently, during World War I, there were other stories of ocean monsters being found. In 1950, a German U-boat sank a British ship off the coast of Ireland. The British ship was holding explosives, and after it went just beneath the water, the explosive blew up, to which the entire crew of the German U-boat said that they saw what they called a 60-foot crocodile get shot out of the water before landing belly up and then sinking underneath. What is a 60-foot crocodile doing off the coast of Ireland? I don't know, and I don't want to know. Maybe it just ate the crew of the Flannan Isles lighthouse. We'll never know. In the same war, in 1918, there was a German U-boat that a British ship came across, to which the U-boat was just sitting on top of the water and immediately surrendered. After the British brought the Germans on board, the captain of the U-boat had said that they were just going about their day when they were attacked by a massive sea monster that destroyed all of their guns and then made them go to the surface, and they surrendered because they were afraid it may come back. Like, there's groups of people seeing monsters, sure, and then there's an entire submarine surrendering to the enemy because they're scared. So with stories like this, you may ask yourself, where did all these things go? If they were so active and attacking ships for hundreds of years, where did they seemingly just disappear to? Well, one of the more popular theories is the idea of vertical migration. Or in other words, super predators that we know of, like colossal squids, and again that we know of and we're just okay with them existing, they have been known to dive deeper whenever there is increased traffic around their normal grounds. Or at least we've seen other squid do that and can assume the colossal squid does that. We haven't really seen them in the wild, which is even more terrifying. So if we know that smaller fish and creatures in the ocean dive down if there's a bunch of stuff around where they're at, then what's to say that these massive super predators wouldn't do the same with increased traffic along waters? In 2003, a group of researchers pinned a tag on a great white shark, which was about 9 feet long. The purpose of this was to observe migration routes and where the shark went along its journey. However, years later, they found the tag just washed up on shore somewhere. This was weird, so whenever they analyzed the tag, which is pretty much a black box, they could see that the shark was just going about his day before immediately getting sucked to 1,600 feet below sea level, at breakneck speeds way faster than something a great white shark can pull off diving straight down, implying that something took said shark and then brought it down to where the big boys play at. I spoke of something in my conspiracy theory iceberg series known as the ocean at night theory. Short version is essentially they made this giant thermal reactor and set it on the ocean as a means of cooling it, but what it accidentally caused was a bunch of super predators to swim up to the surface, which led to a theoretically like Cthulhu-sized creature attacking a group of researchers and militaries, which is comforting. But if massive creatures, and some of which we know to exist, have gone underwater in order to get away from us, then what's to say they can't get the courage to come back up? There's ships such as the USS Scorpion, which is an American submarine that completely disappeared in 1968 before pieces were found of it shredded at the bottom of the ocean, about 9,000 feet down. And it itself was only one of 4 submarines that completely went missing in 1968. There are more famous things such as the bloop, which was an underwater sound that was recorded across microphones about 3,000 miles apart, implying that whatever made the noise was way bigger than anything currently on our books, as well as all your general horrors about the ocean. There are countless stories of sailors who had spent long time at sea seeing the ghost of people walk across their ships, or stories of men who sat on the back of the ships at night, how they can hear singing from somewhere out across the waters. When you think of the number of people that have died in the ocean, and if you're someone who believes in the idea of haunted locations, how could there not be a more haunted and infested poltergeist than the seas themselves? There's also stories like the island of Bemaha, which is off the coast of Mexico and just disappeared. Like, this island had been charted on maps ever since the 16th century. It was a known fact that the island was right there off of the Yucatan Peninsula, and everyone knew about it, and it was even marked as recently as 1921. Then in 1997, whenever Mexico was making land deals with the United States, they said that they wanted that island, and whenever they went to like put a stake on it, they couldn't find it, and they're like, huh, that's weird. We should probably look into that. So then in 2009, they launched a full-scale search for this island, to which they determined that after hundreds of years, it just doesn't exist. Which, when you think of the ocean as being so massive that things like islands can just be there and then they can't, that is awful, and I hate it. But the seas are not only horrific for the missing persons that I've talked about earlier, and ocean monsters and ghosts and things of the like, but in a purely physical sense, they are a testament to the uselessness of humanity. Concepts such as the island of Atlantis, which it's believed by many modern historians that perhaps it was a city that sunk beneath the waves off the coast of Greece, have always stuck with people because ideas of something as important as a city to us being completely overtaken by the waves in nature is almost appalling. Whenever I think of tales like Atlantis, it reminds me of a post-apocalypse, the idea of nature reclaiming what man built no matter how much effort we put into it. There's a specific horror associated with the ocean, which I have in small spurts, known as submechanophobia, which is the fear of man-made structures beneath the water. The reason that this is so terrifying to me is because it honestly encapsulates everything that I've talked about up until this point. And that is the idea of the ocean having absolutely zero regard for you. Think about this. Any other scenario, being lost in the woods, being stuck in the middle of the desert, whatever, you still have your legs, you still have your sight, you still have the ability to move. However, the ocean does not care that we are in no way adapted to it, and that any second that we spend in it without some man-made creation is completely at its mercy. But in the same regard, the ocean doesn't really care about our understanding of it. It seems in a sort of mystic way with stories like the Flannan Isles Lighthouse or the crew of the Mary Celeste, that people can simply be plucked off the earth and were never given an explanation otherwise. But not only does the ocean not care about you or it care about our reasoning, it doesn't care about our monuments either. Whenever you look at images of submechanophobia and you see these great things that we built, however big or small, sentimental or otherwise, and you see them beneath the water, there's this destitute sense of something being forgotten. It's like no matter what level of sentimental nature we apply to something, as always, the ocean just doesn't care. And it almost creates this sort of weird liminal space that while we're looking at it and we want there to be some sense of cherishness or memory or just something sacred, there isn't any. Roughly 9% of species within the ocean are officially logged as to where they fit onto a larger tree, and about 20% of the ocean is charted. That means 80% of the single largest body on the entire planet is a complete mystery, as with many of the events that take place on and within it. Within the Marianas Trench, it is so deep that you can take the entirety of Mount Everest, put it at the bottom, and you would still have a mile to go before you reach surface. Think about that. The single largest thing that we can comprehend and the largest structure that we could ever imagine on land. The ocean will take all of it and bury it so deep that we would never have known otherwise if it had done so in the first place. And this is what I meant by the beginning, that it is so absolutely terrifying that there's almost a romance to it. It is wrong in every single sense that something should be wrong. It's inhuman, it's unreasonable, and it's uncaring. And it's for that reason I love stories so much of men who brave the seas, and sailors and skippers and everyone else who go out into that infinite nothingness. Like, there's people who think that space is scary. I mean, you can see in space. In the ocean, it's quite literally infinite nothingness, and it doesn't even give you the courtesy of being allowed to see the infinite. And that's what's so terrifying about it, the idea of absolute abyss all around you. Whenever I tell someone I'm afraid of the ocean, a lot of them have a follow-up of, oh, do you not like sharks? Or, oh, do you not like insert some other generic creepy animal? And as a matter of fact, something like sharks would be comforting, because while it would be terrifying if, I was in the water and about to die, for sure, if I'm in the water and I see something like a shark, that is something tangible, something I can comprehend. But the idea of just a foreverness that won't even give me the courtesy of seeing, standing, or breathing within it, that's more horrific than I could ever imagine. And yet I don't have to imagine it, because it's right there and it's as real and as terrible as it possibly could be. For Halloween, I wanted to talk about something scary, and there is nothing more scary to me than the concept of the infinite that is finite. For Halloween, when a time that we're all talking about what scares us and what gets us afraid, I wanted to not only tell you these stories, but go in depth with some of my feelings towards it near the end, in order to get the point across to you why I feel the sea is both infinite in its majesty and its terror, and that there is nothing in our imaginations that can be both as beautiful and as dreadful as that of the abyss. So hopefully, if you weren't afraid of that upcoming family vacation before, I hope that you definitely are now. But what I hope even more is that you enjoyed the video, that you have a happy Halloween, and thank you for watching. Like I said, it was Halloween. I wanted to talk about the thing that's the spookiest and scariest to me, and as I hopefully got my point across in the past hour and a half of recording, I don't know how long this is going to cut down to. Hopefully I got that point across to you. So thank you so much for watching. If you're new here to this channel, there's been a lot of new people lately. Hello, hi, thank you so much for coming. And thank you for sticking around this long if you have, this late in the video. It means a lot. You are fantastic, and thank you for coming here. I love all of my viewers. You guys are great, and you give me the ability to do this, and it means the most. And I feel like October's been great. Not only has it been such a fantastic month for growth on the channel and just meeting and talking to so many lovely new people, I've also been able to really dive into a lot of the content I want to get into. And that's thanks to you all, and thank you so much. So as far as, well, let me get into my thank yous first. We have hit 750,000 subscribers, 750,000 subs. And I don't like talk about it all the time, woohoo, I made this much, because I feel like it gets a little braggadocious, and I know it can be annoying sometimes, but I really am honored and blessed in a way I can't really describe, and it's thanks to you all. So thank you for being a blessing, and it really means a lot. Thank you. Thank you so much. I'll go ahead to all of my Patreons. Thank you here to my top tier patrons. You guys are fantastic. I tell you this all the time, but you're the reason that I can do this, and it Hello everybody, today we are going to be talking about the devil's temptation of Jesus as adapted into the story of Paradise Regained. Paradise Regained is John Milton's sequel to his much more famous work, Paradise Lost. I've already covered Paradise Lost on the channel, so if you want to check that out, a link to the video will be in the description, but you can understand this story without having to know that one, as both are adapted directly from the Bible. In the Bible, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell the story of Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. At the beginning of Jesus' earthly ministry, he went into the wilderness where the devil tempted him for 40 days. This story immediately follows Jesus' baptism, and to many is the beginning of his earthly ministry. So John Milton took that story as the beginning of humanity's redemption and paired it as the natural sequel and conclusion to the narrative he opened in Paradise Lost, which was the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. So the primary crux of this story is how the devil decides to tempt Jesus and the conversations between the two. As a biblical nerd, I find this story incredibly fascinating, and hopefully I'm able to convey that at least a little bit. Even if you have no interest in the Bible or any other aspect of Christianity, just hearing the argument that the devil gives to Jesus of why he should quit and Jesus' counter-argument against him are fantastic in their own right. If you are familiar with Paradise Lost, or at least my video on it, then the devil that is portrayed in this story is the same characterization that Milton had in Paradise Lost. So while it's all based on biblical events, it's also interesting to see a kind of conclusion for that character. This story also gives me an excuse to talk about a bunch of obscure theories when it comes to religious prophecy and demonology, so of course I'm going to talk about it. So if that sounds interesting to you, then stick around as we talk about the argument between Jesus Christ and the devil as portrayed in Paradise Regained, which will inevitably lead to me ranting and raving about angels and demons and other forbidden knowledge of Christianity's lore, but I think that's what you all are here for at this point. But before you guys have to hear me ramble about obscure religious literature, let's talk about something that actually matters, like managing your money. Because as someone who's currently trying to budget for forerunner of Christ, and John the Baptist baptized Jesus, this was seen as the firm beginning of his ministry on earth. It says in the Bible that whenever Jesus was raised up out of the water, that the Holy Spirit came down to him in the form of a dove, and God said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Now all of that is from the biblical account. Here we have Milton's first addition to the story. As this is happening, Milton says that Satan is watching all of this, and that as soon as the Holy Spirit comes down and God says that he is pleased with Jesus, Satan begins to worry. See, it's revealed later in the story that Satan knew that Jesus was to be the Son of God, as he had heard the tale of Nazareth when the angels appeared and said that the Son of God is born, and that he's been watching Jesus for all of these years to see if he would try any form of conquest or to figure out what God's plan was. And while he was unsure of Jesus' power, seeing God himself send down a bird and then God say that he is happy with his son causes Satan to realize this guy's probably the real deal. So on hearing this, Satan gathers together all of his demons, or fallen angels, to discuss their next move. It's mentioned that between Paradise Lost and now, the demons had made their way out of hell and can freely move between hell and earth. Because if you'll remember, one of the main points in Paradise Lost was that humanity freely accepted the devil and sin and death into the world, so now the demons have reign back and forward. Their power is kept in check by God. They can't just wantonly kill off humanity, but they can tempt them since humanity can choose to follow them instead of God. So it says here that the demons are gathered together in the air. This could either mean that they are invisible in a different plane of existence on Earth with everyone else, or that they are quite literally like up in the sky talking to each other, because you know they got wings and whatnot. Satan says that now he worries that this Jesus Christ is the real deal and that the long-awaited bruise may be upon them. This is a reference to back in the Garden of Eden, whenever God said that one day the Son of Man will come to bruise the serpent's head. Or in other words, God would send his son to destroy the devil forever. Satan quickly brings up the point that they also can't just fight this guy. Because if you'll remember the story in Paradise Lost, the reason they were cast out of heaven in the first place, or fell out of heaven, is because they were trying to declare war against the armies of heaven, And then Jesus showed up, and his power was so immense that they decided to jump into hell rather than fight back. So they can't take this guy head on. So the devil reasons that the best way to take this guy down is the same way he took down the rest of humanity, through temptation. And remember, Satan's original problem with Jesus is that he felt betrayed because he wanted to take the place that Jesus had as the Son or the right hand of God. So Satan reasons that if this Jesus is where I once was, then I know the thing that would have gotten me then was the opportunity to show my power or wisdom. So if we can do what we did to Adam and Eve and use his pride to get him thinking the way that we do, then we might have a shot at both him and God. I, when no other durst, sole undertook the dismal expedition to find out and ruin Adam, and the exploit performed successfully. A calmer voyage now will waft me, and the way found prosperous once induces best hope of like success. In other words, not only is he going to try the same thing he did with Adam, but this time he thinks it's going to be easier, because he already did it once. God sees all of this in heaven, and this is actually the only time in the story that we are given the perspective of God in heaven. That happened a lot in Paradise Lost, but this is the only time that it happens in Paradise Regained. God sees all of this and tells Gabriel that he knows the devil is now going to try to tempt Jesus, but that it is fitting, because what kind of sacrifice for humanity or representative of humanity would Jesus be if he didn't experience temptation? And while talking to Gabriel, God says, he might have learned less overweening since he failed in Job, whose constant perseverance overcame whate'er his cruel malice could invent. Job is a famous character from the Old Testament of the Bible. Effectively, the devil told God that he could corrupt any one of God's followers if given a bit of temptation and hardship. So Job was put to the test and suffered and tempted by the devil, and in spite of all of it, Job never turned away from God. So God is saying here that Satan thinks this is going to be just like Adam. He's going to tempt him with pride, and that's all it's going to take. But he hasn't considered that Jesus is more like Job than he is Adam, and that in order for Christ to be a sinless human, he must experience temptation, because sinlessness without the human experience and human wants is meaningless. And how could he one day take the throne if he didn't deserve it? We then come back to Jesus Christ, who is now walking through the wilderness shortly after his baptism. Jesus Christ is thinking on divinity and his place in this world, and how he feels the Holy Spirit led him to begin walking through the woods. As he is walking, he thinks on how he has always desired to meditate on Scripture, and that he knows that if God is leading him to do something now, it must be for a purpose. This gets into a part of the story that was very highly debated back in John Milton's day, and while there's a bit more of a consensus on the topic now, it's still definitely a hot issue. And that is the human divinity of Jesus Christ. He is the Son of God, he is a part of God himself, but he was made flesh and dwelt among us as one of us. If Jesus Christ was the only perfect person who ever lived, which most of Christianity agrees with, then what does that even mean? Well, at John Milton's time, this was hotly debated between church leaders, rulers, Protestants, Catholics, and everyone else. Some believed that to be fully God, Jesus had to be omniscient and omnipotent. In other words, he knew everything all at once and was also all powerful over everything all at once. But that would mean that whenever Jesus was on earth as a human, that he had full knowledge and power over the future, time, existence, and everything else. But several argued that that would mean any temptation or trial that he went through would be null and void, because if you can see and control the future, then choices are really meaningless. On the other end of the spectrum, people argued the human side of it, saying that Jesus was a perfectly normal person who just, at certain times, was given visions or knowledge of what he was to do next, but for every other respect, he was just a normal guy. There's even an idea called the baptismal revelation, that up until Jesus's baptism, he was just a normal guy who had no knowledge that he was the Son of God or that he was to be the sacrifice for humanity until the moment of his baptism. And whenever that dove came down that I mentioned earlier, some people believe that whenever the Holy Spirit came to him in the form of a dove, that is the moment that he received knowledge of the world and existence and his role as the Son of God. So there were a bunch of ideas floating around at the time Milton wrote Paradise Regained. However, Milton's idea, or I mean, he never explicitly says it, there's never like a parentheses where he describes his feelings on theology or whatever, but the Jesus that he portrays in the story seems to be in line with most modern interpretations of what the divine Christ really means. And while I can't profess to be fully knowledgeable on every different sect of Christianity and every different theory for what God is, I have sat under a lot of different religious leaders and churches in my time, and I have never heard any, to my knowledge, I've never heard any that have said something other than the theory I'm about to say, which is also the Jesus portrayed in Paradise Regained. The general consensus is that Jesus was both fully God and fully man. In other words, he had the mind and wisdom of God as it applies to humanity. In other words, all of his knowledge was perfect, all of his wisdom was perfect, his guidance, his leadership was all perfect. But that perfection was limited to the human form. In other words, he still felt emotion like love and sadness and feelings like pain and hunger. His experience on earth was not exempt from the conditions of humanity. The mind of Christ was perfect in every way we can imagine, but he was still human during his time on earth. That explains how the same Jesus who sang songs and laughed with his disciples was the same Jesus who cried at hearing that Lot had died. It explains how the same Jesus who was furious when he saw that God's temple was overran with markets and merchants is the same Jesus who was afraid in the Garden of Gethsemane and told God that if there be any other way, to not let him go through the crucifixion. And it explains that while he was sinless, which is very important for, the whole dying for humanity thing, he also experienced the downsides of humanity, like temptation. Because as God in the story said earlier, what kind of representative of humanity would he be if he didn't go through the same trials that they do? That's a lot of setup, and sorry if that was boring, but it's important for whenever we see how Jesus reacts to Satan in the story, that we understand Milton is coming from the perspective that Christ fully understands his place as Jesus on earth, and that he fully understands his divinity and is divine in his wisdom and words. However, he can experience temptation and is refuting these not just for the sake of, making the devil feel sad, but because he is actually refuting the temptation he's experiencing in that moment. In other words, it makes the experience real rather than just a show of force. Also, whenever I sit down to make these videos, I try to, pick fun, easy topics, and then I just spent like 10 minutes explaining the divinity of Jesus Christ. So I'm sure the comments are going to be thrilled with that. So as Jesus is walking through the wilderness, he's thinking on these things and mentions that he feels hungry. Again, he's been walking for nearly 40 days at this point. As he's walking, an old man walks out of the wood line. It seems that the old man is gathering together firewood, and he asks Jesus what he's doing all the way out here. Jesus just says that he's walking through the wilderness, and then the old man says, "Aren't you the guy who was baptized by John the Baptist some few days ago?" The old man continues and says, "Well, you're clearly hungry, and I'm clearly hungry, and during that whole charade, I heard both of you say that you were the Son of God. So, if you really are the Son of God, why don't you take all of these useless rocks around here and make them into bread? Then we can both be happy." And then Jesus replies, "Thinkest thou such forsen bread? Is it not written, for I discern thee other than thou seemst? Man lives not by bread only, but each word proceeding from the mouth of God, who fed our fathers here with manna. In the mount Moses was 40 days, nor eat nor drank, and 40 days Elijah, without food, wandered this barren waste. The same I now. Why dost thou then suggest to me distrust, knowing who I am, as I know who thou art?" The parentheses about "I discern thee not what thou seemest," and him at the end saying "I know what you are," this old man is Satan in disguise. Spoilers. And Jesus replies to him and says, "Elijah, the prophet, had to suffer without food. Moses had to suffer without food. So who would I be to not share that same burden that they bared in my name?" So this temptation doesn't work, and it says that Satan does this grand transformation and turns back to his true form. Also, to give you an idea of how much, Milton's spicing up the story. The entire account of that first temptation in the book of Luke just says, and the devil said unto him, it's never mentioned that he's in disguise, by the way. It's just, and the devil said unto him, if thou be the Son of God, command this stone that it be made bread. And Jesus answered him, saying, it is written that man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word of God. So Milton's, having fun with it. I could just imagine, like, he was blind at the time that he wrote this, by the way, Milton. So I could just imagine blind Milton sitting there like, what if I made the devil an old man? That would be fun. So now Satan, standing before him undisguised, goes on his whole charade of, oh, well, I just came to see you and how wonderful and great you were. And even though I've been cut off from most of my power of God, I can still see divine beauty, and you sure are beautiful. And then he says, well, I've just been playing my part, doing what I'm supposed to. Like that Job guy, for example, whom I mentioned earlier was a person Satan tempted. He says, it was my job and God gave me power whenever I was supposed to tempt Job, but I was just doing that to help humanity out, to, show them a steadfast person to get behind. And also, whenever I went to Ahab, a lot of people think that, I destroyed Ahab, which is a wicked king from the Old Testament. The devil's like, a lot of people think I destroyed Ahab, but really, I just did what Ahab asked me to. I just used some of my power to help him out. So really, I've been looking out for the little guy this whole time. Satan says, men generally think me much a foe to all mankind. Why should I? They to me never did wrong or violence. By them I lost not what I lost. Rather by them I gained what I have gained, and with them dwell co-partner in these regions of the world. If not dispoor, lend them off my aid, off my advice, by presages and signs and answers, oracles, portents, and dreams, whereby they may direct their future life. Envy, they say, excites me, thus to gain companions of my misery and woe. At first it may be, but long since with woe nearer acquainted, now I feel by proof that fellowship in pain divides not smart, nor lightens aught each man's peculiar load. Small consolation then, where man adjoined, this wounds me most. What can it less? That man fallen, shall be restored, I nevermore. So the devil's saying, why would I have a problem with humanity? All I've ever done is try to help them. And I do help them with dreams, with signs. People call on me, the devil, to give them knowledge of the future. And I do that. I'm just trying to help them out. And he says that one day humanity can be restored. We all know the prophecy that they can join by your side, but I surely can't. So really, I'm just trying to be a help to whoever I can and whoever wants me to. What's also funny, we're about to get into Christ's response, but what's funny is, just like with Paradise Lost, a bunch of people read this story of like, oh, is Satan the good guy? Is Satan really the cool dude and God's the bad person? Because people just want to be edgy. And I saw so many analysis of this story that took that section I just read and were like, Satan's right. Like, he's got my vote. When I can't stress this enough, that is the devil talking. Of course, he is going to be manipulative in what he says. Side note, do people who go into Christian stories like this, do they expect that the devil's just going to be like, wow, I can't wait to kill some children. I just love eating babies. And whenever they read it and the devil's like, look, I'm trying to help humanity, they're just like, man, I never thought of it that way. Jesus responds and effectively says, yeah, why do you think they need you? Why do you think humanity needs anything? Because the whole sin, death, and not good stuff was your idea. Humanity was perfect in the Garden of Eden, and then you came in and ruined that. So the only reason anyone would look to you because they're worried about their future or loved ones or people who have passed on or what have you is because they're looking for answers to stuff you brought into the world. Not only that, but every deal you make is in order to gain more power. If it's not to make humanity turn away from God and see themselves as icons of God and things to be trusted in, so that way they don't go to a divine power that actually means something against you, then it's to directly benefit yourself and make people worship you or think that you should be in charge. He talks about Job and he's like, what reason did you have to torment Job? Like, Job and God managed to use the story for good and the reverence of what a follower of God can be, but the reason you did it was just because you didn't like him, just because you wanted to torture the guy. He says that you have abused humanity for thousands of years to build up your own pride and power, and now have the gall to stand before me and say that you're really just looking out for him. Jesus says that my point and God's point is to give humanity wisdom and an oracle without penance, not so they have to turn to you to just uplift yourself. Satan replies and says, sharply thou hast insisted on rebuke, and urged me hard with doings which not will, which is a way of saying, wow, you raised some very good points. Anyway, he goes on to say, so while you're, down here on earth in the wilderness, can you entertain me for a little bit? Do you mind if I just kind of follow you around and see what this Son of God is? Because if you are supposed to be the Son of God, I should know what to reverence and what to respect. And he compares himself to a hypocrite in church. He says if God allows a hypocrite to stand in a church and not be destroyed, perhaps you might allow this sinner to be in your presence. And Jesus replies and says, the very fact that you're able to stand here right now means God has allowed you here for a reason. So if this is my trial to put up with you, then sure, you can follow me around. So Satan's like, okay, cool. I'm going to quickly go away for a little bit for no reason, and I'll be back. So it says that he disappears into the invisible all at once. The reason he's doing that is because he's now going back to the demons of hell to re-strategize so that when he shows up to Jesus later, he has a new game plan. After this, we see Andrew and Simon, two of Jesus's early disciples, who are back with John the Baptist, worried if something has happened to him. It's funny here because the early disciples are effectively used as a sort of Greek choir, because in a lot of traditional Greek plays, there's a choir who either recaps or commentates on the events of the story. So here, as the disciples are sitting around, they talk amongst themselves and say, perhaps whatever Jesus is doing, it's of some greater importance, and if the Spirit is guiding him, it must be big. We then see Mary, who is musing over the divinity and purpose of her child, because just as much as he's her son, he's God's child as well. We then see Satan return to his followers, and after he joins them once again up in the air, he explains that the whole turning rocks to bread thing didn't work. As a matter of fact, he's unsure if temptation will work at all and needs a new idea. While the devil is thinking, Belial, one of the demons mentioned in Paradise Lost, pops up and says that they should tempt Jesus with women. Now, as far as demonology goes, Belial is interesting. The word Belial is mentioned a few times in the Old Testament in reference to other people who are doing wicked things. The most famous example of this is the wicked sons of Eli, who are described as sons of Belial. Now, the word Belial is most often believed to mean either of wickedness or of corruption or of evil. So whenever it says sons of Belial, most interpretations take that to mean that they were of wickedness or just bad people. Like if today I said someone was the son of evil, I'm not saying they're the literal child of something named evil, just that they're of evil things. Well, in some sections of the Dead Sea Scroll, which were discovered in the last century, there is a demon named Belial who is described as the master of wickedness. This would explain why a lot of early traditions said that there was a demon named Belial. As a matter of fact, Belial is one of the 72 demons mentioned in the Lesser Key of Solomon. Through occult tradition, Belial has kind of been described as a sort of demon of lust, or at least of temptation, because Eli's sons that I mentioned earlier, and a lot of other times in the Old Testament that sons of Belial are mentioned, it is people who are enacting sexual crimes of some kind. So it's believed that Belial is a sort of agent of lust, at least, again, in a lot of occult tradition. So to see here that this folklore demon, known as Belial, is depicted in John Milton's story as the one poking the devil and telling the devil to send women to tempt Jesus, is a very cool reference for nerds like myself. Belial continues and says that after all, it worked on King Solomon. And King Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived, so of course, sending women to Jesus is their best move. King Solomon, or the son of King David in the Old Testament, was again described as the wisest man who ever lived, and followed God righteously up until he began to fall in love with women from far off lands who converted him over to their false gods. So Belial's saying, if the wisest man who ever lived was corrupted by women, let's try that on Jesus. And Satan's response to Belial is the funniest part in the story. He says, Belial, in much uneven scale thou weighest all others by thyself. Because of old thou thyself dotest of womankind, admiring their shape, their color, and attractive grace, none are, thou thinkest, but taken with such toys. Before the flood, thou with thy lusty crew, false-titled sons of God, roaming the earth, cast wanton eye on the daughters of men, and coupled with them, and begat a race. In other words, the devil says, Belial, you always suggest women. Of course you always suggest women. Not everyone gets as distracted by women as you do, so stop bringing it up. That mention about coupling with mankind is in reference to the book of Genesis, where it says the sons of God and the daughters of men joined together and created a race of giants, which if you've seen my conspiracy iceberg, you know how I feel about all that. So the devil is saying you need to quit bringing up women. You're always obsessed with women. That's all you think about. The last time that I let you do your whole thing with women, we got giants all over the planet, and there had to be a whole flood for that. So stop. The devil continues and says, of course women worked on Solomon, because Solomon was born into a kingdom. Anything he could want, he was born with. He already had it. So the thing that is going to lead him astray is things of pleasure, because that's all he's ever known. But Jesus is a being of wisdom and enlightenment, and he's here for a purpose. And trying to distract him with pretty girls isn't going to cut it. This gives Satan an idea. Jesus is a being of righteousness, and surely he must be a powerful creature who is worthy of praise. So, rather than trying to tempt him with things he's not interested in, like women, we should try to tempt him with something like honor and glory, and a way to prove himself in what we believe he wants to be known as. Which again, harkens back to the original temptation of Lucifer and also Eve in the garden of trying to exalt yourself above others. So even though the devil already pretty much tried this with the whole turn the rocks into bread thing, he's going to try it again, only more direct. I should also mention the reason that he's trying to get at Jesus and God through these temptations isn't because if Jesus performed a miracle, that would be wrong. He performed several miracles on earth, and it's not like turning rocks to bread would be a downfall, at least not in the act itself. What the devil is trying to do is trying to get Jesus to lift his spirit up above humanity. He is trying to make Jesus realize that humanity is pathetic and not worth his time. So if he just decides to do his miracles now and decide to take his rule of the throne now, then he can go ahead and skip to the fun part. This is all to throw off the bruise of the serpent's head that was prophesied back in Paradise Lost, because the devil believes if he can get Jesus distracted on something else, something that Jesus is supposed to be, then he can diminish God's plans and hopefully not lose. And of course, he himself maintain his power over earth. We then go back to Jesus, who is still in the wilderness. He's very hungry, but enduring. And during his hunger, he thinks of Elijah and Daniel, and how he is now suffering the same turmoil that they suffered in his name. There's also little lines of poetry that I like a lot in the story. Like, for example, as Jesus is walking, he walks onto a hilltop, and there's a whole section describing the scenery. And then it says, that opened in the midst a woody scene. Nature's own work it seemed. Nature taught art. Just little notes like that, like beauty as we know it and art itself originates from nature in some way. And just the concept of nature teaching art what beauty is. It's cool. I like it. So as Jesus is walking, suddenly a very rich and opulent looking man appears in front of him. Now, whenever it describes this guy's appearance, it's straightforward and just says that this is Satan. Earlier, whenever it was talking about the old man, it said at the end, it's like it was revealed that it was Satan. But from the beginning here, he's just called the Tempter. So at least to us, Milton is saying that, yes, this is Satan. He's appearing as like a rich, opulent ruler. But he doesn't explicitly say that to Jesus. And Jesus immediately knows, like he looks at him and perceives him and calls him the Tempter and all that. But to me at least, it was kind of implied that the devil was trying to make a disguise and it didn't work, which would mean I choose to believe that's what happened because it's funnier. Because that would mean the devil appeared as an old man and was like, "Oh, Sonny, why don't you turn these rocks to bread?" And then Jesus was like, "I know you're the devil." So he transforms into the devil and is like, "I'm so sorry about that. Can I hang out with you a while?" And Jesus says, "Yes." So the devil's like, "Great, I'll be right back." And he disappears. And then a rich man walks out of the brush like, "Well, howdy ho, sir. Have you thought about being God today?" I don't know if that's what it's implying, but like I said, I choose to believe that. The devil says that Jesus shouldn't have to suffer out here because this is the same land that the Israelites needed manna if they were to eat anything. So Jesus should feel no shame in getting hungry now because it took a miracle to feed the Israelites all the way back then. Jesus says that he doesn't need anything. And even if he did, he's not going to take something from someone with an ulterior motive. And the devil continues and says, well, all nature is yours when you think about it. Like this entire world was your creation. So you've never taken anything. People are just holding stuff that is yours. So you could have whatever you want and there's no stealing associated with it. As he says this, he tells Jesus to look, and in the middle of the forest, a giant buffet appears. It's mentioned that on the buffet are fruits as sweet as the fruit from the tree of knowledge, and that every manner of meat and pastry and dessert is laid across this table, and all around the table are servers with every drink you could imagine. It says that the men are resolute as soldiers and that the women are as beautiful as the women that the knights of King Arthur would imagine in the woods. The devil continues and says that nothing here is outside of the Jewish tradition. And if you were to eat all of this, you would be doing no wrong. You're a hungry man who came across food, and if you're to eat things that are within the law, then what's wrong with that? As a matter of fact, he doubles down and says that Jesus should set an example. Because what? Does he want his followers to get the idea that they're to turn away free food when there's nothing wrong with it? Jesus responds and effectively says, I could have done that. Again, my purpose out here is to endure the plight of man and to show that I am worthy of the throne that I will one day take. If I want the angels to come and materialize any food I could imagine, I could have done that. That's not the point. Satan says that he understands that Jesus' purposes are beyond just food or pleasing the flesh. So with the snap of his fingers, it says with the noise of wings and talons, everything disappears. Which is a cool idea that all at once demons appeared with the blink of an eye and only the sound of them could be heard as they took everything away. The devil continues to try to boost God's ego and says that, of course, Jesus is greater than appetite. He's the Son of God after all. He has to be great and he has to be a king worthy of praise. But he continues to talk and says, but how could he be great without fame? You could be the best ruler in the world, but if you don't have anything to rule, no one will know of you. So he continues and says, if you want your magnificent influence to rule over the world, then we need to get you some money and a whole lot of soldiers and chariots and other things kings have. Christ responds and says that this is in no way what a king is supposed to be, that it is greater to be a king of your own spirit than a king of your own country. That things like wealth and riches, while not inherently evil, if someone chases after them to better themselves or better their position, all that they're doing is seeking vainglory. Furthermore, that there's a nobility in poverty, that by existing happily and contently in spite of not having material gains, you're proving your spirit truly worthy of something to be praised. Jesus continues and said that whenever God was told by the devil, which is funny because the way Jesus phrases it is he's just like, hey, remember when you did this? Jesus says that whenever God was asked by the devil who his most righteous man was, God didn't say a king or some ruler of a giant empire. He said, hast thou considered my servant Job? Job, a man who was wealthy because of God's blessings, but he wasn't a king. God looked on the spirit rather than what he had. Also, a little bit of Milton's preferences shine through here, because after Jesus brings up Job, Jesus just starts talking about Socrates, because if you'll remember, Milton really liked, Greek mythology and plays and all the philosophers. So Jesus just spends a lot of lines like, and think of Socrates. That guy was incredible. Like, he was poor, he was sad, and real sad he died and all. But that Socrates guy, yeah, he was cool. And it's just funny to imagine that out of everyone in human history, Jesus would be like, "Hiya, Socrates." Satan counters this and says, well, while that's true, you are a pure and righteous soul. And if you rule over people, that will undoubtedly be a good thing. I mean, you want good things to happen to others, right? You're here to spread love and prosperity. So why wouldn't you want to be on the throne where you can just do that more effectively? He continues and says that Jesus could take down the Roman Empire. Then his people really would be free. Then he said the prophets would have joy in the afterlife, knowing that their prophecy meant something. And in a sense, Jesus is being kind of selfish if he doesn't take the throne right now. Jesus says that this is all in due time, that he's not here to disrupt humanity's choices, but to aid them. He says now his time on earth is to be the servant, so that once again, he will one day be worthy of being the king. And then Jesus continues and says, by the way, if I step my way up to the throne, wouldn't that destroy you? Because Jesus knows that the devil knows the entire purpose of Jesus coming to earth is to bruise the serpent's head, right? To conquer death, hell, and the grave forever. So Jesus is like, why are you trying to hype me up to get on the throne, knowing that that defeats your entire purpose? So Satan just turns on the victim routine. He's like, oh, well, I have had to be cast out of heaven, and I am constantly in misery and woe, and I just want to get it over with. So I don't want to exist anymore. So the sooner that you take the throne, the sooner I can die. And I'm really looking forward to it. He continues and says, why wait? Everything will be better as soon as I'm gone and you're in charge. The devil continues and says, besides, you were born in Bethlehem and you've lived in Nazareth your entire life up until this point. You haven't even seen the empires and glories of the world. So let me show you. The devil takes Jesus to a mountaintop, and from there, they survey the kingdoms of the world. They can see all the mighty empires of Greece and Rome to China and India, and all the stages of the world that Jesus could have rule over. The devil keeps speaking and says, you know, prophecy is really nothing without action. So far, everything that the prophets have foretold means nothing. You're supposed to be the ruler of the world, right? And so far, you've shown no signs of that. On top of that, he says, even if you rule with peace and try to be this perfect benefactor to everyone you come across, how long do you think that's going to last? Do you think that the Romans are going to be okay with that? Do you think that whenever the empires of the East make their way over here, that they're just going to listen to what you have to say? The devil says, as a matter of fact, if I was you, I would start conquering right now. I would start with the Parthians. I would take all that they have, take their armies, and from there, you can attack Rome. Again, the devil is thinking of this like a military conquest. The devil finishes this diatribe by saying, if you want that throne of David that you were prophesied to take, then I can help you take it. Jesus begins his response by saying, thou neither dost persuade me to seek wealth for empire's sake, nor empire to effect for glory's sake. By all thy argument, for what is glory but the blaze of fame? Jesus replies and says that when my time comes, it won't be like this. It won't be a conquest or a bloodshed. It will be a beneficial rule and reign over all the earth. No destruction of kingdoms, no torment. It will be peace, something that clearly the devil doesn't understand. This is when Jesus starts throwing in slight jabs at the devil himself, saying things like, the devil would know these things if he was still at the side of God, but now his sight is so diminished from his lack of glory that he can't see the truth. The devil snaps back and says, don't think so little of fame or glory, because this God of yours, your Father in heaven, all he wants is glory. His entire purpose is for the world to worship him and for all of us to love and praise him so much. So for someone who thinks that glory isn't that important, you should probably talk to the Father. Jesus says, and reason, since his word all things produced, though chiefly not for glory as prime end, but to show forth his goodness, and impart his good communicable to every soul freely, of whom what could he less expect than glory and benediction? That is, thanks, the slightest, easiest, readiest recompense. From them who could return him nothing else, and not returning that would likeliest render contempt, instead, dishonor, obloquy. In other words, God made everything. The very fact that life exists at all is because of him. So whenever he wants people to come to him to have happiness and to have love, he's just trying to share more of his soul. People following him isn't for his own glory. I mean, he created the world. He doesn't need that. It's instead so that love that he created them with can be pure and focused, like it was always supposed to be. Before, again, the guy standing in front of him messed that whole thing up. Jesus continues and says, and as a matter of fact, for someone who keeps bringing up the throne of David and the lineage of Israel, didn't hear any of that whenever you were trying to kill them for hundreds and thousands of years. As a matter of fact, he says, remember all those times you tried to murder David outright and kept possessing people throughout Israel and knocked out thousands of them at a time and made them worship false gods? Where was that concern for the throne of Israel then? Why does it only matter now that you want me to take it for some reason? And right after Jesus says all that, it says, perplexed and troubled at his bad success, the tempter stood, nor had what to reply. Discovered in his fraud, thrown from his hope so oft, and the persuasive rhetoric that sleeked his tongue and won so much on Eve, so little here, nay lost. But Eve was Eve, this far his overmatch, who, self-deceived and rash, beforehand had no better weighed the strength he was to cope with, or his own. In other words, the devil was taken back. This worked on Eve, but Eve was a human, and he's standing before the Son of God now. Whenever the devil does speak, it says that he returns like a fly returns to food after it's been swatted away. So the devil, having no real response for this, just says, hey, have we looked at Rome yet? You should look at Rome. Let's go to the other side of the mountain and take a look at that. Satan continues talking and says that the king of Rome has fallen into temptation and that he's lusty and full of pride and he's a horrible leader to rule this world. So perhaps rather than conquering, Jesus could simply take his throne. He would have dominion over effectively the whole world, at least the largest empire, and he could be a just ruler rather than the ruler who sits on the throne now. And Jesus says, oh, he was tempted? Where do you think he got that from? While talking to the devil, Jesus says, then proceedest to talk of the emperor, how easily subdued, how gloriously. I shall, thou sayest, expel a brutish monster? What if I withal expel a devil who first made him such? Let his tormentor, conscience, find him out. For him I was not sent, nor yet to free that people, victor once, now vile and base. Jesus is like, oh, you want me to kick out the emperor because he's a bad guy? How about I just kick you out? Did you ever think of that? Jesus says once again, my kingdom is beyond all of this. And you were supposed to be a part of that kingdom too, Lucifer, but you lost your chance. And clearly you're not repentive about it, so that's out the door. The devil responds and says, I'm not trying to offer you nothing. I'm offering you the entire world. As a matter of fact, forget Rome, forget India and China and the lands of the Far East, forget all of it. I'll just give you the world. Satan says, I have power and dominion over the air because I've been granted it for a time, and it's my power to grant that to you. And the devil says, all you have to do is fall down and worship me, and the world, every empire, every kingdom, every piece of it can be yours. This is phrased in Luke 4 verse 6 when it says, and the devil said unto him, all this power will I give thee, and the glory of them, for that is delivered unto me, and to whosoever I will I give it. If thou therefore wilt worship me, all shall be thine. So the devil is saying he'll give him the world if Jesus says that Satan is God and bows down to him. And Jesus responds and says, I never liked thy talk, thy offers less. Now both abhor, since thou hast dared to utter the abominable terms, impious condition. But I endure the time till which expired, thou hast permission on me. It is written, the first of all commandments, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and only him shalt serve. And darst thou to the Son of God propound to worship thee accursed? Now more accursed, for this attempt bolder than that of Eve. Jesus is like, I have had it up to here with you. I have hated every minute of this. And I originally just hated you and your offers, but now I despise both of you. He says the only being of worship is the Creator, God. And as a matter of fact, the devil only has possession over these things because he has granted them for a time by humanity's choices and God's power. And that to stand before the Son of God, Jesus Christ, and asked Jesus to worship Satan, as he said, what you're doing now is even bolder than what you did with Eve. You're a steward, not an owner, and you need to act like it. So Satan says, you're right. You are far beyond anything of kingdoms or wealth. I've been watching you since you were a child in the temple, and the way that you spoke to the leaders, and you always had this wisdom about you that far exceeded want for money or land or power. And I should have realized that. So what you want's to be a ruler over Greece. That's what I can get you. So if you look right over there, and he starts to show him Greece and all of the philosophers, and he's like, I see that you're on a conquest of power, not wealth. So let's get you famous like that Socrates you like so much, huh? Jesus says, while they have done great things, it's still nothing compared to the existence with God. While they've done great things and are very smart people, it's nothing compared to the understanding of divinity, especially not the understanding that Jesus has. And again, Satan's missing the point. After Jesus finishes speaking, it says, so spake the Son of God, but Satan, now quite at a loss, for all his darts were spent, thus to our Savior with stern brow replied, since neither wealth nor honor, arms nor arts, kingdom nor empire please thee, nor aught by me proposed in life, contemplative or active, tended on by glory or fame, what dost thou in this world? The wilderness for thee is fittest placed. I found thee there, and thither will return thee. Yet remember what I foretell thee. Soon thou shalt have cause to wish thou never hadst rejected, thus nicely or cautiously, my offered aid. Effectively, the devil says, what do you want? I am trying to give you empires, wisdom, riches, anything you want, and you have nothing to do with it. But you're supposed to come here as a king and as someone to rule and to reign. And I keep trying to give you avenues for that, but you're just not interested. The wilderness is the best place for you. No wonder you were running around in the woods, because that's all you ever do. Satan uses a part of astrology. He says he looks to the stars and sees the future, and that in the future, there's going to be a lot of suffering and turmoil in Jesus' life. And he's going to wish that in this moment, he had accepted the devil's offer. Again, it's like the devil can see parts of the future and parts of the plan, but he still doesn't get it. So the devil drops Jesus back into the wilderness, and as night is beginning to set in, Jesus goes and begins to sleep on the ground underneath a sort of root system of a tree, trying to hide himself from the morning dew. As he tries to sleep, the devil decides that he is going to try to make Jesus' night miserable, so he fills his head with nightmares and visions, and causes a storm that it says causes even the mightiest trees to bow over, and lightning and thunder and rain pour down. The next morning, whenever Jesus gets up and begins walking, Satan comes to him. It says that storm last night was horrific, and that this is only the beginning. Jesus is just now beginning his earthly ministry, and there's going to be a lot of physical and mental suffering. And that really, if Jesus wants to avoid it, he needs Satan. Or that, if nothing else, Jesus needs to take his throne quick, or there's going to be a lot of hardships he could have missed out on. Jesus replies and says, me worse than wet thou findest not. Other harm those tears which thou speakest of did me none. I never feared they could, though noising loud and threatening nigh, what they can do as signs betokening or ill boding, I contemn. As false portents not sent from God, but thee, who, knowing I shall reign past thy preventing, obstrudest thy offered aid, that I, accepting, at least might seem to hold all power of thee. Ambitious spirit, and wouldst be thought my God, and stormest refused, thinking to terrify me to thy will. Desist, thou art discerned, and toilest in vain, nor me in vain molest. Jesus is saying, all I am is wet, and everything that happened to me last night was you. So why on earth would I want to make league with someone who is just trying to destroy me? Because I know what happens whenever I take the throne, and you know what happens. So we can stop playing this game where you tried to build up vanity in me, and you cause all sorts of storms and bad things to happen, because it's not going to work. And Satan's reply to that is one of my favorite parts of the entire story. To whom the fiend, now swollen with rage, replied, then hear, O son of David, virgin born, for Son of God to me is yet in doubt. Of the Messiah I have heard foretold by all the prophets of thy birth, at length announced by Gabriel, with the first I knew, and of the angelic song in Bethlehem field, on thy birth night that sung thee Savior born. From that time seldom have I ceased to eye thy infancy, thy childhood, and thy youth, thy manhood last, though yet in private bred, till at the ford of Jordan, whither all flocked to the baptist, I among the rest, though not to be baptized, by voice from heaven heard thee pronounce the Son of God, beloved. The devil is furious. He's saying, I don't even think that you are the Son of God. And then he begins to say how he is obsessed over Jesus for every minute that Jesus has been on earth. He says that he was there the night that the shepherds told of Jesus coming into the world, and that he has followed Jesus ever since. And that something about the way, I don't know if Milton was meaning to read as much into this as I am, but I'm going to do it anyway, where he says the line about beloved. By voice from heaven heard thee pronounce the Son of God, beloved. If you'll remember, Satan's original sin was the pride that he brought in because he wanted to take Jesus' place at the right hand of God. Everything that he has is jealousy. And this contempt that he's yelling at Jesus with is saying that Jesus doesn't deserve to be the Son of God. He's certainly not acting like it. Or in other words, he's certainly not acting how Lucifer would have. He continues and says, thenceforth I thought thee worth my nearer view and narrower scrutiny, that I might learn in what degree or meaning thou art called the Son of God, which bears no single sense. The Son of God I also am, or was. Man, that or was carries some weight. I am, or was. And if I was, I am. Relation stands. All men are sons of God, yet thee I thought in some respect far higher so declared. Therefore I watched thy footsteps from that hour, and followed thee still on to this waste wild, where by all best conjectures I collect thou art to be my fatal enemy. He's just yelling at Jesus. He's saying, you're not worthy to be the Son of God. I've spent years trying to discern what makes you special, what makes him look on you as his child in a way he didn't look on me. What holds me back from being in the position you were supposed to be? And man, that line, it's where it says, the Son of God, which bears no sense. The Son of God, I also am, or was. It's a tragic line. And I want to be careful here. I'm not saying that the devil, as he's portrayed in the story or real life, to my belief, is, sympathetic in a sense. Because, once again, let me emphasize, the concept of bad and death and all that, his idea. He brought that in. So definitely not deserving of, I feel, any empathy or anything like that. However, it is tragic. It is misery that the devil, the morning star, who was described as one of the chiefest among the angels, fell to such depths. And now to imagine this conversation with Jesus, where the entire time he has kept up this haughty demeanor of, oh, well, perhaps I could help you with this, or perhaps you can do that. And now that none of his tricks have worked, he's just broken down and he's yelling, why are you beloved? Why do you get to be special? I've followed you your entire life up until this point, and I see nothing you have that I don't. What does it even mean to be the Son of God? I was one of those. Humanity's one of those. What makes you so special? Why can't I be like you? To the utmost of mere man, both wise and good, not more for honors, riches, kingdoms, glory, have been before contemned, and may again. Therefore to know what more thou art than man, worth naming the Son of God by voice from heaven, another method I must now begin. The devil's saying, I still have no idea why you're considered this special Son of God, so I guess I'm going to have to find out the hard way. He takes Jesus and flies him to the top of the temple in Jerusalem, and placing him on one of the pinnacles on top of the temple, he says, if you're so special, if you're this Son of God, then prove it to me. In the Old Testament, it says that no harm would come to the Son of God that wasn't meant to be, and that at any moment he could call down angels to save him from whatever danger befalls him. So if you're really the Son of God, why don't you jump off this temple I've set you on top of and tell the angels to come get you? This is a last-ditch effort to, at this point, just prove to the devil that Jesus has something he doesn't, that he has some power or reverence, or to at least see God's point of reverence in him. In Luke chapter 4, it says, "And he brought him to Jerusalem, and set him on a pinnacle of the temple, and said unto him, If thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down from hence. For it is written, He shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee. And in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone." And Jesus, thrown up here on top of the temple, the last ditch from Satan himself to see what he has of worth, to prove that Jesus could be pushed to the point of showing his hand, of doing what Lucifer would have done, of wanting to prove his power to his adversary and show how much better he is, trying to make Jesus give a final, if desperate, display of power. And all Jesus does is he looks at him and says, "Also it is written, Tempt not the Lord thy God." And this was the defeat. This was all it took. Because, again, Lucifer's point was to prove to God or humanity, or at least himself, that Jesus is no better than him. That he will be pushed from the same pride that caused him to eventually tempt and cast humanity into darkness, from the same pride that besets him now and keeps him from allowing himself to forgive. The same pride we saw all the way back in the garden. And all of his temptations have been to try to get Jesus to fall into that same trap. So here he's made himself the villain. He's thrown Jesus on top of the temple and says, "Save yourself. Show me the angels. Show these angels I can't be a part of, that I used to be a part of. Show me a hint of your power." Because that's exactly what Lucifer would do. But all Jesus does is quote the scripture. It says, "I'm not going to tempt God." Because, again, that would be exactly what Lucifer would do. It says, with this, Satan falls, that he falls down towards the earth, truly defeated in spirit and body. And it says, as he falls as the griffin who asked the question in mythology and then cast itself into the deeps. That Satan here, knowing he's bested, throws himself from the air of the clouds. And that as he does, the demons join quickly to commune and take him back to the sky. And that as they talk of how this is the final defeat, and how it truly seems that the serpent's head will be bruised, and that they are powerless to stop the true Son of God. At the same time, angels come and commune with Jesus. They carry him from on top of the temple, and it says they take him to a lavish field full of beautiful food as his trial has passed, and he has proven himself worthy to stand up against temptation and worthy to be the sacrifice for humanity. This is from the account of Matthew 4, verse 11, where it says, "Then the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him." The angels begin to sing, and in their song they say, "Him long of old didst thou dispel, and down from heaven cast with all his army. Now thou hast avenged supplanted Adam, and by vanquishing temptation hast regained lost paradise, and frustrated the conquest fraudulent. A fairer paradise is founded now for Adam and his chosen sons, whom thou, a Savior, art come down to reinstall, where they shall dwell secure when time shall be of tempter and temptation without fear." They're saying that now it's been proven to all witnesses Jesus is the Son of God, and that now the mistake that was made at humanity's creation, all the way back in the garden with Adam and Eve, has now been undone. The lost paradise finally regained. They begin to sing of what he'll do in the future, that he will be so powerful that he will run demons out with just his voice, a reference to the story of Mark chapter 5 of the maniac of Gadara, and how he will do great things in the name of God, and that his name will be great forever, and that now it has been proven that humanity will be saved. And the story ends with the lines, "Thus they, the Son of God, our Savior meek, sung victor, and, from heavenly feast refreshed, brought on his way with joy. He, unobserved, home to his mother's house, private returned." Just ending with the picture that, in spite of all of this, Jesus returned to Mary's house, and from there continued the ministry we see in the Gospels and the ministry that affects us to this day. And with that, we end the story of Paradise Regained. Paradise Regained is definitely not as large of a work as Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is over 10,000 lines, I believe, and Paradise Regained is just over 2,000. So, like a fifth of the length. And also, the wording is much more direct than a lot of Paradise Lost. I know it may not have sounded it, because a lot of it's kind of like, middle-ish English speak. But Paradise Lost used a ton of simile. There was a ton of metaphors made, representations between like old Greek stuff compared to the Garden of Eden, whereas most of Paradise Regained was a conversation. And it's interesting how Paradise Lost was all these beautiful pictures and poems, and we kept cutting back between heaven and hell and the garden, whereas here it's just a conversation between two people. Well, people. But it's so interesting to me how Milton managed to take this story that otherwise is pretty short in the Bible and expand it into this overwhelming narrative. And I think he did it masterfully. And it's interesting to see how his ideas of theology relate to a lot of ideas that are still practiced and believed today. And it's just, I believe a lot of wisdom taken from the words there. And I thought it was a fantastic story, and hopefully you did too. And I just want to say thank you for watching. Paradise Regained is a fascinating story, and if you couldn't tell, I'm a big fan. I know I was probably reading too far into it at some points, but some of it, like with whenever Satan is talking to Jesus and he's like, what makes you special? Why are you beloved? And that it killed me when I was reading it through the first time. And he says, I am a son of God, or was. Man, that's good stuff. And I see stuff like that, and I'm like, to be one of these ancient writers who, ancient, it was the 1600s. That's not ancient. But to be one of these writers from times before, and to not have, access to the internet like we do, not able to read other people's opinions and interpretations in art, and to just glean from the scripture and bring this out of it's beautiful. And I also want to clarify, I'm not saying that I believe the account of Milton to be like the true account, or like, oh, this definitely happened in between. But it's a beautiful way to look at it. And a lot of the doctrine is interesting, and I think it's cool, but I've gone on about it long enough. So thank you all so much for sticking around. Hopefully you enjoyed. And also, you want to come over here, sweetie pie? She's got the dog who is fighting her right now. A lot of you probably saw my community post and tweet. Can you sit down in here? Can you fit?
We can.
Hello, hi. So this is my girlfriend Kayla, as a lot of you know, but I'm here to announce.
This is our son.
And this is our son, Ollie. A lot of you may have not have seen the community post or tweet. So I want to announce that she is no longer my girlfriend, Kayla. She is now my fiance, Kayla. I asked her to marry me, and she said yes.
I said no.
She said no, and I'm now holding her against her will. There's a gun behind the couch. You can't see. But she is, next to God, the best thing to ever happen to me. And I am honored to be with her. She honored me by saying yes. And I'm thrilled. My life couldn't be better right now. Guys, if I died tomorrow, I just want you to know I had a great run. Everything's been fantastic. I want for nothing. Anyway, I'm very happy. Oh, he's not happy at all. He's super upset. But I love this girl a lot. She agreed to marry me. So you all have a new mom now. Well, she's always been your mom. But now she's not your stepmom. She's just the mom who stepped up.
This is your brother.
This is your brother, Ollie. He's so upset. He's got his ears pinned. Okay, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to announce that here for those who don't know. My soon-to-be wife, you're all a legal mother now, I should say, and this guy. Anyway, just wanted to announce that. And yeah, hopefully you enjoyed Paradise Regained. More videos coming soon. And that should be it. That should do it for now. But I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. And I will see you in the next one. Bye! This is Isaiah.
Is this not the one?
This is not. Apologies.
Thank you.
No problem. Bye. That was the FBI, probably. At 1:30 p.m. on August the 28th of 2003, a pizza delivery driver named Brian Wells would go out on what seemed to be a normal pizza delivery. 1 hour later, he would be standing in a PNC bank with a shotgun in his hand and a bomb strapped to his chest, demanding $250,000. The tragedy and... Hello everybody, today we're going to be telling the story of when angels fell from heaven, God created humanity, and the Garden of Eden itself, all told from Satan's perspective in Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost was written by John Milton.
Finally figured out why.
Depending on who is consulted, Temple OS is the outdated product of a deranged mind, the work of a misunderstood genius, or some complicated combination of the two. While the operating system was the result of over a decade of work, its creator, usually referred to as Terry A. Davis, attracted even more interest than the project itself, with his nonsensical, narcissistic, and often offensive rhetoric, including casually inserted slurs. Even so, many people defend both him and his project, and feel a particular affection for both. So what is Temple OS, and how did it come to be? In October of 2008, a Reddit account named LoseThos was created and began posting frequently. Its posts consistently linked to different parts of the website losethos.com, but their titles varied from practical and straightforward, such as a free non-Unix 64-bit OS, to perplexing, such as Godly Song Artificial Intelligence and Belligerent Anti-Atheism Themed Operating System. He would regularly post these to the programming subreddit, where they would either go largely ignored or downvoted, mostly the former. The website was dedicated to the eponymous custom operating system, reminiscent of such from the 80s, offering a list of pages describing it, as well as demonstrative videos and images. Also available was the creator's name on his contact page, Terry A. Davis. The homepage describes the motive behind the project. Quote, LoseThos is for programming as entertainment. It empowers programmers with kernel privilege because it's fun. It allows full access to everything because it's fun. It has no bureaucracy because it's fun. It's the way it is by choice because it's fun. LoseThos is in no way a Windows or Linux wannabe. That would be pointless. Much of the rest of the text in the home section was jargon, but a few things stood out. First, the operating system was written in a customized version of the common programming language C. He admitted the limitations of his creation, saying, quote, LoseThos was designed from scratch with a clean slate and has no compatibility with anything else. However, he attempted to spin this severe restriction as a positive thing, saying, I took every opportunity to improve things once I made a clean break with the past. That's another reason LoseThos has value. It is innovative. Terry mentioned that LoseThos output in 640 by 480 with 16 colors, an incredibly outdated format, but despite its appearance, he stated that the operating system was built to run on modern hardware. Due to the way the system was structured, it also was incredibly vulnerable to malware, but this was likely never a concern for Terry, as there was no networking on the OS whatsoever. This meant that any system running LoseThos would be unable to communicate with another computer, ruling out internet and LAN functionality entirely. With no printing supported either, anything made on the system would be isolated to that system alone. To work around this, he recommended using LoseThos in conjunction with another, more common operating system, though the purpose for doing so was questionable at best. Terry also provided what he called songs from God, with lyrics appearing near the top of the screen as the operating system played them. Under a tab labeled History, Terry shared some of his experiences working as a computer engineer. It opened with, quote, "I find this very crass, but there are lots of chestnuts boasting about in open foyers and have to say this. I have a 1440 SAT and was a National Merit finalist. Fuck yourselves. When you're your own boss, you can do what you like the way you like it, too. I happen to like to have fun when I program. I'm an expert in knowing what is fun about programming, and that's why Luzthos is so awesome. Designed to have fun programming. If you're so smart, tell me what's fun and not fun about programming." Along with photographs of himself and his work, he explained that he had been employed by Ticketmaster from 1990 to 1996, coding and designing hardware while simultaneously earning an undergraduate degree and a subsequent master's degree in electrical engineering. It was also during this time that he created the basic code that would eventually become Luzthos. After quitting Ticketmaster, he began his own business named Home Automation and Robotic Equipment, or HARE, in order to work on an early consumer-grade milling machine controlled by a PC, a sort of early home 3D printer. In 1997, having apparently halted work on his machine, he took engineering work again, but his personal history ends in 2003, 5 years prior to sharing Luzthos. As of 2008, it was unclear how he was making money. Users on Reddit seem to regard Luzthos mostly as a curiosity and an odd personal project, and couldn't find any practical purpose for it. One person replied, quote, "Sorry, no network, wireless, etc. is just a waste of time. Times have changed since Apple II." Another person offering constructive criticism stated, quote, "At the moment, it's not clear what you want people to do with it. I think you have a cool project that deserves more interest. Good luck." In response, Terry suggested that Luzthos was, quote, "just a place to mess around with programming," but this answered little. He also explained that his operating system was, quote, "a souped-up Commodore 64 basically," but this further confounded its purpose. Terry A. Davis was also active on Reddit in a different way. He would frequently post to the atheism subreddit, declaring the existence of God and entering arguments with the users there, but these interactions were marked by uncanny paragraphs of apparently random words, common phrases, and excerpts from literature off of Project Gutenberg, preceded by the phrase, "God says." Those comprised of random words and phrases were particularly uncanny, and sometimes he would reply with nothing but these God says sections. For example, one reads in part, "God says, confute, exodus, print, propound, resumed, glorify, elect, forgiving, pleasant, itself equals long, catch, abject, oft times, miracles," etc. However, few people would typically attempt to engage with him, and his comments were downvoted as people refused to reply, despite Terry's apparent need for conflict. When he made a post entitled, "Bad News, There is a God," almost nobody responded, and so he began making responses to his own post continuing to denounce atheists for their non-belief, but these often seemed to lose focus partway through. One of these comments reads, quote, "God, they don't want to talk to you. God's good company, you just have to hold up your end of the conversation and try not to be annoying. What is it about computer science people and atheism, huh? Brain equals computer, I imagine. That's what once made me an atheist. Still not too sure about that. I think the answer lies in going beyond the notion of causality as we typically think of it. There can be incredible synchronicity in the world, which makes causality quaint. God says, Homo to infinity and beyond, Ivan, don't mention it, ha, how far, hypocrite, heads I win, tails you lose, you are my sunshine, etc. But Reddit wasn't the only place he was posting. On November 29, 2008, Terry made a post on the OS Dev forums entitled The Luzthos Operating System, using Luzthos as his username there as well. It read, quote, "You might be interested in the Luzthos operating system as a starting point for your own, or for ideas. It's 64-bit and includes a 64-bit compiler/assembler I wrote. It's public domain and open source. I tried to keep it simple and I innovated many things. It supports multi-core." At first, forum users were curious and attempted to run Luzthos on their own systems, but when they ran into difficulties, the creator responded with an air of smug superiority. Quote, "I have no idea what VMware software does and don't care. All I know is it's likely to be slow and you'll struggle with additional constraints. The first thing I did was write an assembler and compiler so I could be independent. It may be too much for you guys. In this thread, he claimed that Luzthos had attracted significant attention on Reddit only a few days prior, netting 50,000 page visits on his website and 500 downloads, but it appears that even if this was the case, the post is now lost. The responses to these posts were universally negative, with people expressing frustration with his elitism, and this fighting attracted the attention of the moderators, who locked the thread the same day it was posted. Between November 29th of 2008 and January 19th of 2009, Terry would post frequently to the OS dev boards, mentioning his operating system as much as he could and portraying his skill and his work as being above the other members. However, there would occasionally be strange digressions in his writing. In response to apparently nobody in particular, he wrote, "Yeah, but he said the resolution wasn't supposed to be permanent, after I made a promise, and you have to keep your word. Sucks." Who he was unclear, but the capitalization of he suggests he was speaking of God. Another post read, "Mental hospitals suck, but disability checks are cool. Guys from Metallica seem to know about mental health." However, he was eventually banned either on or after January 19th, as no posts exist on the account after this time. In February of 2009, 4 months after he began sharing Luzthos with the internet, Terry accelerated his posts on Reddit. As he became a familiar figure in the programming subreddit, a few people began replying and engaging with him, attempting to learn not only about the operating system, but also about Terry himself. Some were impressed at the ability of Terry to construct an operating system all on his own, while others dismissed Luzthos as outdated and useless. Similarly, while some people had their curiosity piqued, others were beginning to lose patience after months of his repetitive posts. One person wrote, quote, "Hey mate, I like your project, it seems like you're having fun and I don't really care that it doesn't have networking or it's just your toy OS. Having said that, please don't fill up the programming subreddit with every single update. If we're interested, we'll watch your page." Eventually, his posts to the programming subreddit halted, perhaps because he'd been restricted from doing so, but by April of 2009, he had begun advertising Luzthos in comments instead. These comments, however, were easily recognized as attempts at advertisement and largely dismissed. Terry would also begin regularly posting to Hacker News, a website similar to Reddit hosted on the Y Combinator website, duplicating his posts in order to gain more attention. However, the moderators would inevitably remove them, likely because they viewed Terry's repeated links to the Luzthos site as spam. As on Reddit, Terry would also comment on other people's posts, extolling the virtues of Luzthos and attempting to turn discussion towards it. By this point, it appeared that Terry's patience was diminishing. When someone criticized him for wasting his talent, he replied, quote, "You guys are all pathetic. You look at the graphics and conclude it's not advanced. Be honest, if I had made a pretty picture, disgusted with you apes. The same sort who said in 1900 everything has been invented. You're probably Linux cultists." End quote. Terry would continue to post on Reddit and Hacker News in the following months as updates were applied to Luzthos, but as 2009 wore on, people began to notice idiosyncrasies in Terry's writings. In one case, a person pointed out that he had ostensibly chosen his extremely limited resolution and colors because he had promised God that he would do so, contradicting a statement from him made earlier that it had been a technical decision. Another person noted with amusement that one of the selling points of Luzthos was Bible and hymns. In November, he would also begin posting about updates in his own subreddit dedicated to the operating system, but these gained far less attention than his posts on the programming subreddit, with nearly nobody commenting, posting, or voting on it besides Terry himself. At the turn of the year, Terry apparently abandoned Reddit altogether without a single new post after December 31st, 2009. By June of 2010, the account had been deleted altogether, and he instead began posting as trivial solutions in a similar way, though the content had begun to grow even more aggressive and offensive. He would also attempt to advertise on the programming subreddit under an account transparently created by Terry for the sole purpose of pretending to be someone else advertising Luzthos. Like his other attempts, it would go ignored. Terry also continued to post to Hacker News throughout the entirety of 2010 to no effect, as his account was shadow banned, only able to be seen if a user had enabled the ability to see dead posts. Attempting to circumvent his ban on the OS dev forums, he created another account, also under the name Trivial Solutions, but he was easily discovered and banned again less than 12 hours later. Despite his lack of desired outreach, he would still create new demo videos of his operating system, where people online would be able to hear his voice for the first time.
I wrote this over the past 7 years full time, and I did a compiler, an assembler, an editor, a graphics library, and it's all 64-bit.
Perhaps recognizing his failure through his other channels, he created a Twitter account in September of 2010 where he would occasionally tweet updates he'd made to the source code. However, with little way for people to discover him, these tweets went ignored entirely. His constant attempts to attract attention would continue through the rest of the year, but they would slow and eventually halt in the first half of 2011. But just as he appeared to be losing hope, he would gain newfound interest, though not the kind he desired. On July 15th, 2011, a user going by Jimford posted a thread on the Something Awful forums entitled Luzthos, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bong. One of the opening paragraphs reads, quote, "Gentlemen, I present to you Luzthos. The very definition of your OS is a piece of shit. The operating system is, without a shadow of a doubt, a piece of shit. Behold, a tale of misery far beyond reading Tom Collins's posts. I give you the afternoon of my day off in screenshot format." Underneath this, Jimford detailed his account of his time running Temple OS through a virtual machine, using numerous screen captures while describing his process. After 3 attempts to begin the installation, he was able to reach the install screen. He stated, quote, "During this period, everything in sight was blinking. Lesser men would have had a seizure from the install screen alone. After I finally gave up, I felt as though I had one." After the installation, he shared the initial user experience, stating, "The strange V thing was rotating and everything that is highlighted was flashing incessantly. I was then greeted with the most horrifyingly ugly thing I had yet seen, even worse than Linux. After closing the worthless tip of the day window, I was apparently sent to my home screen. There didn't appear to be anything other than a bunch of homegrown, unplayable games. The only options in the user main menu were games, all of them horrible." Much of his experience was spent fumbling, as he did not know any commands, until he finally discovered what appeared to be a tutorial, which helped little. After returning to the home screen, he clicked on hypertext that opened a window that gave, among other things, Terry's home address in Las Vegas and a more detailed history of the operating system. Terry had written, quote, "I've been working on Luzthos full-time for 8.0 years. Yes, I wrote every one of the 129,486 lines myself. No GPL code, no linkage or dependence on other code. I am a for-profit company, not welcoming code contributions, but feedback is very welcome. Technically, I started Luzthos in about 1993. I set it aside until 2003 when I resurrected it and worked full-time, seriously on it." Eventually, Jimford attempted to perform some coding in Luzthos. Quote, "Turned out the C+ thing this dude wrote was as much of an abortion as the OS itself. I decided to go to the Luzthos website, attempting to garner a clue as to what was going on. Further confusion. Only RMS could beat this guy in bullshit long-windedness. Not only is this operating system a piece of shit, but so is his so-called custom programming language. Eventually, I got it down enough to make something useful out of it." While Luzthos had already become an in-joke among programmers online, this forum post made it much more accessible to others with less programming knowledge. It's likely that Terry was aware of this thread, as only a day after Jimford's post, he made his own on Something Awful, complaining about a ban he had received on the OS dev forums. However, the members of the Something Awful forums were not sympathetic, and Terry was eventually banned from the Something Awful forums as well. With his usual outlets either barred from him or ignoring him, Terry would lose most of his online audience even as new people were discovering Luzthos, but this would coincide with a drastic deterioration of Terry's coherency that would attract gawkers of a new and much more numerous kind. Throughout 2011, Terry had continued to post fruitlessly on Hacker News with his familiar rhetoric, combined with his strange messages from God. Small details about his life would emerge, such as the fact that he lived with his parents and that he was seeing shrinks, but as the year was nearing its end, his online activity took on a drastically different tone. This change was first apparent on Twitter. On October 20th and 21st, 2011, Terry posted a series of 4 tweets denouncing the American Central Intelligence Agency. It opened with, quote, "I hate the CIA. They operate by blackmail. They are scum. They got the Saudi king by short hairs." A few months later, in December, he would tweet again, saying, quote, "Kill CIA people. Hit them with cars and run. They are scum." He then implied that he had done just that, killing what he called a doppelganger. 2 months later, he further specified whom he claimed to have killed. Quote, "There's crazy actors/agents who fuck with me. My parents are enemies. I killed one in 1999. Nah. Score is 1-0, 'cept you crushed my nuts. God says, horse sung accents revenge wholesome deservings marrow funding necessities." His posts on Hacker News also began to take on this fear and anger towards the CIA, believing psychotherapists were CIA agents using doppelgangers to control people's actions, but Terry would soon begin to include racial beliefs in his writings. On January 14th, 2012, he wrote a comment on Hacker News that read in part, quote, "Little kiddies, you might regret freeloading when justice smacks you as you try to make money on a blog or software in later years. God is just. I win 10 lotteries a day. I'm not at all worried about justice. Niggers. Not at all worried about public opinion. Everything is shrink actors. Evil British agents and shit who have no regard for God. Once I said the difference between niggers and white people is niggers don't know the world is just." His usage of the word would steadily increase through the months of 2012, but rather than grow annoyed with him, people online would instead begin to pity him. On August 12th, 2012, a post was made to the website Metafilter entitled, "An Operating System for Songs from God." Its description was sparse. Quote, "Lusthos is an operating system written by a schizophrenic programmer. A narrated demo and many songs by God and me, the apparent primary use of the OS, are available to view." While many early replies were fairly dumbfounded and commented on the absurdity of the website, some were already aware of Terry's strange online interactions, and one person replied who had been observing Terry for some time, largely dismissing him. He wrote, quote, "Surprised you didn't mention his Hacker News submissions, comments, and profile. I actually went down the rabbit hole with this a couple years ago and was surprised there wasn't more discussion of the technical aspects of what he was trying to do/talk about, since it is largely indistinguishable from a million other crazy geek projects. Sadly, he barges into discussions with incoherent conspiracy theories and long-winded tirades unrelated to the main thread. I feel sad for him. I have family and friends who act similarly. Whatever he's done merits some discussion, but when he derails into crazy conspiracy theories and personal attacks, it's hard to move forward. The guy's been hellbanned on Hacker News for years, but so are a few people who have dared criticize Paul Graham, so I end up stumbling across his comments occasionally, reading dead links/comments, and ultimately feel sad that he doesn't have a more receptive outlet for his lunacy." End quote. But people likely didn't expect Terry himself to appear. Under the handle Lusthos, he attacked the OS dev forums that had banned him in early 2009, over 3.5 years prior, though he claimed erroneously that he was banned 2 years before then. He wrote, "Where do I begin with how evil that site is? I treat it as entertainment. Been banned since 2007. They brainwash people into supporting 286 processors and say nothing of x86-64. They say nothing of developing compilers, though. That's what any new OS should do first thing for its command line." He would continue to post comments, though they often had little to do with the topic at hand. One of the staff on the website eventually saw fit to reply, quote, "Heyo, Lusthos, it's great that you signed up, and if you want to have a conversation with folks here about your work or what people have brought up in the thread, that'd be really neat. That said, threads here are more of a conversation and less of a posting free-for-all in general, so yeah, slowing down a little and nixing the 'and here's a random thing I'm thinking' stuff in favor of something a little more focused would work better." Terry immediately replied by sharing the text randomizing tool he used to generate his God Says passages. When he began to grow confrontational, people engaged with him, and he spent the next 11 hours arguing with others. However, when the post was archived the following day, the discussion abruptly ended. While the aforementioned sites were not the only places he was posting, they were the only places he was receiving attention, however active he may have been on Stack Overflow. By this point, between his posts on forums and link aggregators, a clearer understanding of Terry A. Davis had emerged. He was in his early 40s, living with his parents after the government had declared him mentally unfit for work following a schizophrenia diagnosis, putting him on disability. Rather than trying to find money for work, he had spent the last decade working on his operating system Luzthos, with a loose and uncertain plan to monetize it. He had also spent at least some of this time believing he could commune with God by interpreting seemingly random events in his life, eventually settling on using random number generators in order to select words as well as biblical and literary passages. He referred to this process as a refined version of speaking in tongues. With awareness of Terry growing online, a small, disparate body of people had taken an interest in Terry and his online ramblings, and soon he would give them far more content than they had perhaps expected. On October 2nd, 2012, Terry released version 1.0 of Luzthos under a new name, Sparrow OS, creating a number of social media accounts under the same name and a subreddit dedicated to it, to little fanfare. Though the operating system wouldn't be known for long as Sparrow OS, it was under this name that Terry A. Davis's operating system became known to the Kiwi Farms, a forum born from the early group interested in Christian Weston Chandler, used to observe and discuss strange people online. On February 26, 2013, a post was made about him, and while the original post appears to be lost to an edit, the replies show the minor interest that people took. Beyond a few bits of ridicule.
Come on!
I should go straight away. I was thinking about
Hello, this is XQC. I subscribed for God Gamer Gameplay. It's been 58 months. All I get is this loop brief. When does the God Gameplay start? Please clarify.
Zoomer slowly leveled up. When all the expert had taken over. That chest. Traffic.
Alright. When you're talking to the god game.
Dude! Okay, I'll do one of the app. Majecka __02 _ is asking, can you tell me how to make crack? So, I mean, there's a few ways to make crack, but in the case like you want to create crack, like you would probably need some chemicals that make like crack in order to turn them into like crack, and that's how you would make it. Spinto is asking, what did you see in Area 51 when you went there? What did I see in Area 51? Okay, Dud. So you know what they were doing? They were doing human experimentation to find the perfect specimen, right? I know this because I was one of those experiments, right, dude? So you guys are not even ready to hear what I've seen. Dud, they're hiding some freaky ass creatures in there, man. That's Rito is asking, how do I get rid of my gambling addiction? Just realize, like, no matter what, you will lose. Okay? No matter what, you will lose. In the long run, you will lose all your money, so just stop. Okay? It's not good for your mental. Okay? Don't gamble. Gamba is trash. Gamba is the absolute scum of the earth. Don't do it. Okay? Nomps is asking, really. Dude, you've got a sick mind. I don't even want to answer that question, but I would say for that, I would say really. Is that good? Scorpio 2 is asking, are you a fox guy or a wolf guy? Dude, honestly, I'm more of a wolf guy. Wolves are cooler than foxes, and that's a fact. Wolves are more of an alpha animal. Wolves are literally one of the strongest animals. I have like 2 wolf tattoos, dude. I think they are really cool. Damn it, Moo is asking. I will ban your ass. Ban, 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 ban. You will never come back to the channel ever again. Do you hear me? Rega Shark 3315 is asking, can you explain Fourier transforms to me? Dud, what do you think I am? A mathematician? I don't know about any of this fancy scientific crap, to be honest. If you want to know about this kind of stuff, you can Google it or like take a math or a science class. I don't know, bro. I'm just a gamer, not a professor.
Dude!